Then our next witness is Leanne Jaffe. No? Oh, okay. Are you Leanne Jaffe?
I'm Leanne, yes.
Oh, she is here.
Oh.
Okay. There you go.
Oh, Don, okay. Hi, hello. Thank
Okay,
you for being...
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is true?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, members of the Assembly. My name is Leanne Jaffe. I'm here in a dual capacity today. I am a clinical social worker in New York State, and I'm also here as an adopted person, an adopted adult. I've been involved with Joyce Barr's organization, with the Evan Donaldson Institute, with Spence Chapin, many of the voices you've already heard from today, working on this issue just for my part alone for 20 years in New York State. I know some people have been at this longer. I want to highlight a couple of things. I'm going to try to keep my comments coherent. I have notes that I wrote in response to some of the other comments that we've heard today. First and foremost, I want to say this really is, it's just plain and simply a human rights issue. And I want to focus on a couple of points here. And I speak from my professional experience. I worked as a foster care caseworker in the public child welfare system here in New York. I also work in private adoption. I counsel families. I train social workers and educators. You have heard from voices both in support and in opposition to this bill that the trend in practice is way ahead of policy and legislation. People are already doing open adoptions. Women who are contemplating making adoption plans for their babies are more likely to choose an open adoption than to choose a closed adoption or to choose an abortion. And I want to say something. I was very curious about the judge's comments about written documents about confidentiality in records. I have participated as an adoption and foster care social worker in termination hearings. And all they are is termination hearings. And Professor Samuels told us about her scholarly research into what records show. We in the community have been saying for decades, produce a document that substantiates this claim of written confidentiality, and there has not yet been one produced. I can tell you that a termination of parental rights is just that. It is only a termination of parental rights. And as Professor Samuels told us earlier, after that happens, the birth parent's role is cast aside in what happens to then that makes the that baby or that child quote unquote a ward of the state. The state is the temporary parent deciding who will then become either the foster or adopted parents to follow. The birth parents are not involved in discussions about what will happen or be contained in the records. They have not been given a choice. There is this implicit code of secrecy and silence that's really just about shame, which is just residual ideas of the past. We're not practicing adoptions that way anymore. Adoptive parents don't want to be kept in the dark about what their kids might need. So I really want to stress, again, there really is not evidence for this claim of a promise of confidentiality to women contemplating adoption plans. I also want to emphasize something you've heard about other states that have opened records for adopted people 18 and over. And I want to talk a little bit about Oregon. Number one, I'm not sure if you're aware, but not only did that pass in that state, that was actually a ballot initiative. It was a referendum. So it was literally the people of Oregon who decided that adopted persons at the age of 18 deserved to have their original birth certificate. And the argument that was made that was successful is that it's about rights, not relationships. To say to an adopted person, your birth certificate will remain a state secret unless people give permission for it to be opened, is to tell someone no less than it's fine with us for you to live as less than a human being, because that's what that says. So we heard some challenging of the ideas of curiosity, that really trivializes a very, very basic human need to know. What defines us as human beings is consciousness. to not know who or where you come from is to really hinder your ability to be a conscious person in the world. There's lots of data, there's lots of research that talks about the need of post-adoption services for adoptive families. I want to highlight the point that what happens in the concept of self in the adopted person when you grow up knowing that the state has said you don't have a right to your birth certificate. Every other American citizen has a right to their birth certificate. We heard from Professor Samuels. They're public documents. It's their public record. But adoptees have been created as a class of people. Also, I want to make the point that sealing records is the only law in this country for which there is never an age of emancipation. And we are accustomed to many laws made. Assemblymember Gottfried, you had made the very astute insight that historically laws are framed as being for people when they're really two people. And a lot of laws that are crafted around best interests of the children and safety of children, as well-meaning adults, we say that it's for them, and then we recognize that there's a certain age of emancipation. Again, with adoption, this is the only law. Adam used the term that it infantilizes adoptees. It does. And this affects a person's self-concept of who they are in the world. And there's research that supports this, and I would be happy to forward that to you as well. So I found myself having a reaction when Judge Kelly was saying, I understand the feelings of adopted people wanting to know. And I wrote a little note to myself that, so I work in mental health as a psychotherapist in private practice. I specialize in adoption, but not exclusively. Feelings are my purview. That's my area of expertise that I can confidently claim. I do not claim to be an expert in the law, but we have heard from other experts here today. So I think just to say that the feelings of adopted people really aren't important enough and don't have the status of a right to a very basic human right, again, to be an American citizen and have your original birth certificate the same way everyone else does. Because again, to deny us that, to make someone's birth certificate a state secret is just to deem them a second-class citizen. Based on the circumstances of our birth over which we have no control, Doris had just made that point earlier. I'm rushing through my comments so that I try to get everything here. And then there was another comment that Judge Kelly had made, that there are many people who may not be fully aware of their parentage because someone in their family may have kept it from them. It may be a family secret, a skeleton in the closet. And I have some very furious notes saying, but the state hasn't kept it from them. And that's a very, very different experience. The state has not kept it from them. In this situation, the state is actively involved in saying to human beings, you don't have the right to know who you come from. Everyone else does, but you don't because of the circumstances of your birth. Again, this is a relic of really an old way of thinking. As I said before, adoption isn't practiced that way. We don't, and I marvel that when we have women saying, I relinquished children, I made an adoption plan, I did not want confidentiality, I was not given a choice, and then we still have this mythologized, very pedestrian argument, but there might be a woman somewhere who might get really upset. My response is, as a clinician, is then give her post-adoption services as everyone involved in adoption really should have. And by the way, Assemblymember Weprin, you had asked if there's a coalition in New York State of agencies who are also in support, and I said yes. It's actually called the New York State Citizens Coalition for Children. I know many people in this room themselves or their organizations may be a member. It's a statewide coalition of service providers to families in adoption and foster care and other general family-related issues. They actually have their annual conference in Albany near the...
Send me their contact info.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Sir, I'll be testifying today. I'm the president.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so there you have it. I wanted to make sure I said that. And Yeah, then there was another comment that the law shouldn't be changed because they were based on well-reasoned tenets, and I quote directly from Judge Kelly, and I wanted to say, I'm so glad he said that because I think the other people who have spoken about research have shown they really weren't well-reasoned at all. And so again, as a social worker, as an adopted person, going back 80 years ago, as Doris had said, that when some of these laws were thought of, although still active even in the 60s and 70s when I was born, they're fear-based and shame-based. And as a society, we have really moved away from that, and it's really just not necessary anymore. And there's one more thing I wanted to say before I close. So here's another point I wanted to make. I'm here in support of the bill, although I will say, actually, for me, it doesn't even really go far enough. And I say that to address any concerns about compromise. I don't think that any adoption should be done without an inherent protection of the rights of the adopted person and the birth parents. And again, people are doing this on the ground anyway. They're not waiting for the law to catch up. But I had said to someone earlier, even 18 years is a long time to wait for the state to say, when you're 18, then you can start writing letters, then maybe you can make some inquiries, and if you're lucky, someone may still be alive, and if you're lucky, then the whole machine of the bureaucracy that needs to be put in place might result in you having some kind of information about yourself. So I see this as a compromise bill, and in my view, it doesn't go far enough, although I am here supporting it today. I'd like to see the need for it in general just be abolished. Okay. If anyone has a question, I'll stop and take a question while I...
Okay. Questions?
No.
We very much appreciate your testimony, and you've argued your case very well. I wish the judges were here to hear some of this testimony.
I do too. Thank you. Are they going to get all the
We will be sending them certainly a lot of the testimony.
Thank you.
I just wanted to just make one comment, if you're done.
Yes.
Your question, why wait till 18, is a very good question, and I don't know that there's a good answer.
I can tell you sort of what the conventional wisdom is in a rhetorical sense, again, as a practitioner in the field. Although we're learning more, and this speaks to a point, too, regarding the point of view of birth mothers. I reunited with my birth family. I'm an Ohio-born adoptee, though a New York State citizen, and I care about this state, so I'm here today, even though it doesn't personally affect me. I found my birth parents. Ohio code at the time said that if the birth parents agree, then the records can be opened. So we met, had our reunion, then they wrote to the court and said, we sanction our daughter knowing who we are, because of course that already happened. The conventional idea, and many birth mothers have said, and my birth mother said this to me, I just assumed that when you're 18, you're allowed to search. By the way, I do a lot of psychoeducation. I have adult adoptees in my practice who their parents and their families have said, when you're 18, then we can do a search. This is the conventional wisdom that's out there. It's a misnomer. And I have to say to people, there's no law that says you cannot search.
It's right up there with the confidentiality misnomer.
It's exactly. They're really very intertwined. The idea is that 18 is the general age of emancipation for everything else in our society. Some things are 21, right? And so it sort of fits that, they even though they're still teenagers, they're old enough and have enough grasp of complex thinking to be able to take in some of this. Some of my mentors in the field have actually pointed out, and this is part of my argument for why earlier is better really from day one. Number one, 18 is oftentimes when people are going away to leave college, and it's really not the best match of a time for a young adult who's leaving home to be taking on what is arguably one of the most personally transformative experiences of your life, to go from not knowing anything to possibly even meeting a real human being. By the way, I want to add to the point, many people get their birth certificates and don't act on it. They just want the birth certificate. And again, that's why I stress the point that it's really about rights. I don't think there's a good enough reason to say to an American, you don't have a right to have your original birth certificate, even though every other person in this country does. And that the one that we have is a fraudulent document. And I encourage you to think about what that does to the psyche of the adopted person, and how you even view government documents in general. My own birth certificate says that my parents were in Ohio in 1970, and they very well were not. So again, the age of 18 is generally the age of emancipation. Birth parents are expecting the call. That's what my birth mother said to me, and many birth mothers say, oh, we just thought that when you're 18, that's when you would be allowed to search. And so they're passively waiting for their kids to come back to them as grown-up people. I argue that the psychological development of the adopted person, as well as the experience, we heard comments about, I think it was Aaron Britvan, and we've spoken at the same conference. We're both regular speakers at Adoptive Parents Committee, which is a grassroots organization of adoptive parents in New York that came together because of a lack of post-adoption services and a lack of education, and they came together to educate themselves. And I've been participating in their conferences and workshops for 10 years. He made a comment, when you adopt a baby, the bonding is immediate, and I think he emphasized, especially for the adoptive parents. So I wanted to comment on that because I think it's a lot more complex. And again, I'm dealing with the psyches and the minds of individual family members, adoptive parents, birth parents, and adoptees. So here's what I would say and what I will always say. Babies bring out the love in people. This is true, right? Babies bring out the love in people. But there's a chasm to pass between bonding and having a baby experience being held lovingly. I don't know if you're aware, there's actually a field now called infant mental health. There's a field called infant mental health. And they're looking at emotional development, development of the brain and the mind from immediately from birth through their first early years. It's recognized, there's medical data that it does represent a trauma, not only the separation at birth. Research has given us terms like genealogical bewilderment to describe the mental landscape of the adopted person. Gap in identity is another term that research has coined to describe the adopted person's experience. So bonding in a real true sense is hindered in this big absence. It's really kind of the birth parent is really has been the elephant in the room, and that's why changes have been made. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.